Russia's summer offensive has already failed, and Russia tries to make up for it with terror against civilians. We'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have hit the Kirovskoye airfield. I reported this in the last sitrep, and by now we have the Crimean Wind Telegram channel from the Crimean Peninsula reporting that there were 5 to 6 secondary explosions, indicating that the damage that was reported by the Ukrainians is probably true, so that they likely destroyed several helicopters as well as an air defense system. We also have now satellite pictures showing us how the damage was done in the Marnivka airfield, close to Volgograd, in Volgograd region. There, the Ukrainians reported 2 destroyed Sukhoi 34 as well as 2 damaged. Other reports were 4 destroyed. The satellite pictures now indicate heavy burn damage on the tarmac where before Sukhoi 34s have been parked. It took some days until the satellites were able to pick up pictures, so likely the debris is already moved. The confirmation is more than just a suggestion. So while it's not 100% confirmed, we can assume that actually at least 2 Sukhoi 34 were destroyed in this airfield. The Russians are reacting to this. We see this here, and we have that from more and more of the Russian airfields, especially the ones closer to the Ukrainian front line, that the Russians are now building hardened aircraft shelters to protect their planes from attacks. This here is from an airbase in Astrakhan, where in the past the Ukrainians managed to hit Sukhoi 57, not destroying them, but damaging them with drones, and that again was possible because the Russian planes were out in the open. Now the Russians are building hardened aircraft shelters for their planes to protect them from future Ukrainian attacks. The Russians struck back with an air offensive. The Russians used in the biggest attack of the war so far 537 different systems. They used 447 drones, 4 Kinshal air-launched ballistic missiles, 7 Iskander ballistic missiles, 41 Iskander-K cruise missiles, 5 Caliber cruise missiles, as well as 3 S-300 surface-to-air missiles in a ground-to-ground role. The Ukrainians are saying they managed to intercept 446 drones. According to their own claims, that would actually mean all but one of the drones is intercepted, which would be an unheard of success rate, especially regarding recent success rates where the Russians more or less consistently have had a success rate over 10%. They say they only hit 1 Iskander, 34 Iskander-K, as well as 4 Caliber. This shows that the majority of the ballistic missiles made it through. Only 1 out of 11 ballistic missiles was intercepted, clearly indicating the weakness of the Ukrainian ballistic missile defenses in this current phase. The Ukrainians are saying the Russians are mostly hitting civilian targets, including double taps. We by now have more or less enough evidence that the Russians indeed do target civilian targets, because we see that the Russian weapons can be accurate when the Russians aim for military targets, but the consistent attacks in Ukrainian cities hit hospitals, hit playgrounds, hit civilian residential areas. That's an indication that the Russians want to spread terror. The goal of this is fairly clear. They want to make the Ukrainians flee their homes, and this would weaken the Ukrainian state by emptying it out, and thus obviously taking away the opportunity for collecting taxes as well as workforce by forcing the civilians to flee the cities. These attacks have led to at least 8 deaths. They led to 8 people dying, including a pilot. This here is the report that a Ukrainian F-16 pilot died in the attack. He achieved 7 intercepts, according to the reports, as the F-16 can only carry 6 air-to-air missiles. This means the 7th one was with the cannon, and this is what we've seen several times so far, that likely he flew afterwards in the debris, destroying the engine, and thus was forced to crash the plane. He, according to the Ukrainian reports, steered the plane clear of potential damage on the ground, but that was too late for him to bail out. And the reason here would be clear too. The top speed of the Shahid drone is 185 kilometers an hour. The lowest possible speed, stall speed of an F-16 is 100 knots, which is more or less the exact same. So a Shahid will likely fly with around 160, and the F-16, which does not have flaps fully extended, which does not have an empty fuel tank, which has weapons loaded and thus cannot even come close to its minimum stall speed, will likely fly twice as fast. The overall armament for the cannon only allows for a few short bursts, maybe roughly 10 to 12 bursts of half a second. Roughly half a second. This means that the pilots are likely closing in very close while flying as slow as possible to allow for a high success rate, because of course the fewer ammunition they use for their cannon, the more drones they can intercept, and this seems to then have led to another loss, at least from what we've seen so far. With the drones flying low and with the plane being at a low speed, obviously engine failure is taking the plane down immediately and gives the pilot no time to steer clear of ground, of civilians on the ground, and while at the same time having the time to catapult himself out. We already have a number of Ukrainian losses. This is actually the third plane the Ukrainians have lost in intercepts like this in the last 2 months. 2 of them have been F-16s and one of them has been a Sukhoi 27. It seems the Ukrainians choose to do risky intercepts like this to prevent damage on the ground, but it is taking a toll. And while in other cases the pilots were able to bail out, in this case he was not able to, and thus paid the ultimate price. We'll switch to the developments along the front line, and here we increasingly say that the Russian summer offensive has failed. Sumy, no reports. I actually do have reports of Ukrainians partially successful counterattacks, but I do not see advances to a degree that allows me to confirm a change in territory. Kharkiv, no change in territory. On the eastern front, we have the Russians advancing a tiny bit here in Ivanivka, but even advancing is already stretching it, because we have here we see they are on the outskirts of Stepova Novoselivka, and here they are in the northwest of it. And if we look at it, so they are here at this point. It's unclear whether they managed to clear the Ukrainian positions in that tree line or not, but they've reached it. And further to the north, they have reached this point here, which was already considered to be a contested area. So while we do have the Russians inside of the gray zone, inside of the no man's land between two sides, I cannot confirm that they actually managed to extend their foothold of the territory there. Further down to the south, we have nothing. No confirmed changes. Actually, Ukrainian operations in the Toska area, but there again, I do not see that the territory has changed. South of the Seversky Donetsk in the Seversk region, we have a Ukrainian officer speaking about the situation there. He's saying the Russians are often using single soldiers carrying an anti-tank mine to blow up Ukrainian dugouts, so probably sneaking up and then throwing in the mine, which usually I think carries 6 kilograms of explosive. And they are also saying that the Russians have used the opportunity to attack due to the fact that drones were not able to fly due to bad weather. Then further south in the Konstantinivka area, that's the next area we are taking care of. The Ukrainians have had successes in Chasiv Yar. We see the Ukrainians pushing the Russians back. This building was struck by the Russians, indicating that it must have had at least a temporary Ukrainian presence in here, indicating that it seems unlikely that the Russians are in this area here somewhere. Otherwise, how would the Ukrainians get there? Then we have further south a Ukrainian presence east of Dilivka. Here, recently the Russians were. Then in a fresh video, we have the Ukrainians at this point. So again, Ukrainian presence confirmed at this point. This is mostly a gray zone here, but we see that the Ukrainians are still operating in this, so I cannot confirm a Ukrainian advance, but there's definitely no Russian advance, while in Chasiv the Ukrainians have advanced. In Pokrovsk, no change in territory. And Syrskyi is saying the Russians seem to be aiming towards the town of Dobropilya. That would mean they try a turning maneuver against Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Obviously, if they reach like this here, then Pokrovsk and Mirnograd will be in a pocket, and thus it will force the Ukrainians at some point to withdraw, especially if the lines of supplies here are under threat, under bigger threat by drones. If all the alternatives to the north here that the Ukrainians could use right now are also under threat. So this is the goal of the Russians. But then again, in the last few days, they have not achieved any success in this area. A little bit further southwest of it, the Russians have now popped up in Novomykolaiivka, here in this town. We have a geolocation of this in the northern part of town. As of now, no confirmation whether the town was taken or not, but probably more or less this has to be taken into the contested area now. And Novoserhivka is probably increasingly under Russian control. We then have some changes or some movements in the region of Saburish. Here, the Russians have taken down a Ukrainian flag at the city sign of Kamyanske. And they have operated in this area. All of it is gray zone. The city sign might indicate that the Russians have pushed the Ukrainians at least temporarily a little bit north. We have a geolocation in here, and the other one is right here at this point. And obviously, with them being able to climb up on a sign and remove the map, that means that Ukrainians probably are not here, but a little bit further north. But then again, we see it's fully in accordance to what we see with the contested area. I cannot confirm that the Russians managed to actually gain a foothold and expand northwards. Overall, the movement is barely accessible, barely visible. We have the Russians still gaining some areas here. I have no geolocations, but if we look at the deep state map, you see that they show some changes here in this area. This is more or less what we've seen in the past, but this is in the past few days as geolocations, when now it's happening what was to be expected, that the Ukrainians are withdrawing from several of the micro pockets there, and the Russians are still pushing afterwards. So while this area here still shows some movement and still shows some minor Russian excesses, there's no significant change in the dynamics anymore, except that the Russian advances get slower and slower. So it seems the Russian summer offensive is already over. The Russians clearly have reached a culmination point. Now we need to understand that apart from the area here, the Russians are barely advancing anymore, if at all. Konstantinivka, they actually have been pushed back recently. The successes northwest of Velika Novosilka are the only ones here, where they recently still have some successes, but they are with limited, to only existing to a limited degree. We need to see, though, that while this is a culmination point, while it appears like a culmination point, as Russia is not doing conventional offensives with huge mechanized groups that then need to consolidate and bring in reinforcements and bring in supply, as it would be in a war of movement. The Russians can fairly quickly change the dynamics again while bringing in significant resources, while bringing in significant reserves. But with the current forces they have, it does not seem likely that they're going to move much here. This might be one of the reasons, while in last situation report we talked about the North Koreans probably getting involved, that the South Koreans believe that North Korean soldiers might be deployed inside of Ukraine in July or in August. The North Koreans will be paid for that. There shouldn't be any doubt that Russia has to pay for those North Korean soldiers. Kim Jong-un knows that he's actually in almost a better position than Putin in this conflict. So if Putin wants the lives of North Korean soldiers, he will have to pay for that, and he will have to pay for that dearly. North Korea is not giving its soldiers for free. That much should be clear. So that means the Russians have asked for it. There's hardly any other way to see that than the Russians asking for North Korean support, because they understand that on their own they are not capable of achieving any even remotely decisive success in this area here. The Russians are working on their troop generation, though, to reinforce their positions. We have now reports that the Russians have used a new type of bomb. It's called the Gromone. This is a kind of gliding bomb that is combining the regular gliding bomb system with wings with the engine of the KH-38, the air-to-ground missile. The engine is thus mounted on the bomb to give it additional range, and according to the Ukrainians that likely gives it a range of 100 to 150 kilometers, which then would obviously give the Russians the opportunity to launch the bombs from further away or to strike deeper into Ukraine, so either have an extended range or increased security for their own planes. But according to the Ukrainians, while they have already observed the usage for almost a year, the number is very small. The Russians apparently, at least as of now, do not produce enough of those engines. Then the Russians are extending their Shahid factory. That was talked about in the past, that there's also discussion whether or not the North Koreans are probably going to send 25,000 workers to extend the production. There we see that Russia will increase its air warfare against Ukrainian cities, but on the ground, no decisive change is expected. The Russians are also extending the factory that is producing the Tupolev 160. We see it here, the strategic bomber. But according to the reports, the factory will likely concentrate on the production of the Tupolev 214 passenger planes, not on the bombers itself. The factory, according to reports, has delivered last year 2 Tupolev 160M2 and 2 Tupolev 160M. The ready rate of those planes seems to be very negligible, though, according to open source reports. And then, according to the Russians themselves, they want to increase the production of their Sukhoi jets. They are reporting that until 2030, they want to increase the effectiveness of their production, the efficiency, by 30%. This would then obviously lead to a higher output. And we have also reports about innovations. Now, apparently, Russian soldiers have started wearing smartwatches that give them notice about FPV drones, about the frequency surveillance. So when drones are closing in, the soldiers themselves will get a message and thus be less surprised, even if it's loud, even if they are in combat. This is obviously a very useful innovation for the Russian side. Ukrainians are also improving. We see here a Ukrainian drone actually dropping an artillery shell. Now we see it has fins in the end, and it clearly has a time fuse. It seems to hit before it blows up, so it can, for instance, penetrate a roof and do damage inside of a building. This allows much higher firepower placed at positions along the front line, and it will obviously save the artillery pieces as well. I would expect them, though, to concentrate more on mortar shells, as their effectiveness is significantly higher in regards to explosives to weight, but we'll see. Maybe we'll see that as well, and maybe mortar shells are in less supply in regards to the actual demands along the front line, so they have more artillery shells to use for this, but as said, we'll have to see. Then in the political sphere, we have some things. Lindsey Graham, the US senator, said that Trump has now said he's going to support Lindsey Graham's law initiative for the Russia sanctions. Trump said to him, it's time to move your bill forward. According to Lindsey Graham, it would demand 500% tariffs. It would initiate 500% tariffs against nations that keep buying energy from Russia. Interesting part, though, is that it's not just China, and where Russia currently, where the US currently had issues keeping up the trade war, and it seemed more that Trump was folding than the Chinese. Not only would it include China, but it would also include a lot of allies of the US, including Turkey, the European Union, Brazil, South Korea, Taiwan, and India. So Whether that is actually going to happen, we'll have to see. We said it in the past here. Piers Morgan, Trump's personal friend, said, ignore what he says, look at what he does. So when he signs that bill, when these tariffs are being introduced, then it's actually happening. Before that, it is not. But what is happening is that the US have ended sanctions against the civilian nuclear program of the Russians. This includes work on a nuclear plant in Hungary. We had some kind of mixed area there in the past too, as European Union, for instance. Several nations are using nuclear power plants that got their fuel rods from Russia. So Russia was allowed to keep selling them inside of the European Union, even after the full-scale invasion. But we see here that the sanctions in this regard are being stopped. To the degree of it, which effect it will have, and whether that's an outrage or kind of logical in itself, because obviously the electricity has to be produced somehow too, that I cannot say. But we have to acknowledge that while Lindsey Graham supposed sanctions against Russia are getting support but not being introduced yet, at the same time other sanctions have been given up. And that's it from me for today. If you like this today's sitrep, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment in the comment section if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.